The wind did not relent. It howled through the crooked trees like a soul in torment, threading its icy fingers through Alara's cloak, tugging at the edges of her resolve. Each gust tore at her like memory, peeling back the warmth of home, of familiarity, of forgiveness. Yet still she walked, one boot before the other, breath sharp and fleeting, her footsteps muffled by the frost-bitten mud. The stone in her hand, smooth and silent, pulsed with the heat of her grasp, as if it too feared the cold of what lay ahead. Behind her, the village no longer watched. Its chimney smoke vanished into the waking mist, and the church, once a pillar in her gaze, had vanished entirely into the pale throat of dawn. There would be no one chasing after her, no hands reaching to stop her. She welcomed the sting. Pain was something she could name. What she could not name, not fully, was the thing that clung to her chest like mold to damp stone. Guilt, yes. Sin, perhaps. But deeper still, something darker. A frozen stream trickled beside her path, its surface crackled with ice like broken glass. Alara knelt by it, cupping water with stiff fingers, letting the liquid burn against her cracked lips. She did not pray. Not yet. Prayer, she felt, should not come cheaply. The stars above blinked, cold and indifferent, and wolves howled somewhere beyond the dark ridge. She did not fear them. Not the wolves, not the darkness, not even the cold. It was the stillness within that frightened her most. The knowledge that her soul, once loud and eager with certainty, had fallen strangely quiet. She had said enough of them in comfort. Now was the time to earn them with suffering. A shadow she had fed with her silence, one confession at a time. Her hands had reached too late. Her scream had come too soft. The priest had told her it was not her fault. But guilt is a beast that does not listen to reason. It gnaws. It whispers. It follows. They shared a fire and silence for hours before he spoke. It faced westward, toward the direction she had come from. Someone, long ago or just yesterday, had left part of themselves behind. She did not touch it. Instead, she pressed her own boots deeper into the slush, forcing each step to speak. We all walk with shadows, girl. Some are behind us. Some are inside us. The trick is to learn which is which. This road, this penance, had been chosen, or rather imposed, with the force of something ancient and unyielding. She bore it as the condemned bear their final meal, quietly, half hopeful, half damned. Ilara's path snaked between trees, gnarled like arthritic fingers in brambles that hissed against her cloak. She remembered the words of the priest, spoken in the hush of candlelight and incense, his voice thin with age, but sharp with judgment. Not all sins can be forgiven with words, child. Some must be walked out through distance, through hardship. The earth beneath her seemed to groan with ancient sorrow. The trees leaned like mourners. And ahead, always just ahead, the road unfurled like a punishment, too long to remember in full, yet too bitter to forget, through devotion. A pilgrimage, yes, but not for glory. Villages appeared on the horizon, distant and silent, but she did not enter them. She passed them like a ghost, eyes down, hood drawn. Pilgrims did not linger, especially not ones with secrets etched behind their eyes. For cleansing, for hope to be reborn in the dust and heat of faraway lands where saints once bled and miracles bloomed. If such places still remembered mercy, she had nodded. What else was there to do when a man in robes condemns you not with wrath, but with weary disappointment? And so she was sent, as the ancients once were, not with guards or chains, but with silence and cold steel in her chest. The road narrowed. By midday, the sun was a pale ghost behind a veil of shifting cloud, casting no warmth, only light. As she rose, her gaze caught something half buried in the snow. A single leather shoe, worn, broken. I am still here. I am still walking. That night, Alara made camp beneath the twisted ribs of an old fallen tree. She lay curled with her back against the tree bark, the stone from her mother pressed beneath her chin like a charm. Her thoughts wandered, uninvited. The boy's face came first, pale, afraid, blue-lipped in the river water. Sleep was shallow and brief. Before dawn had colored the horizon, she was walking again. 3 days passed like this. The landscape changed. Hills rose, forests thinned, and stone ruins emerged like broken teeth from the soil. Once grand towers now held only wind and ravens. On the 5th night, she met another traveler. An old man, bent and narrow-eyed, with a staff carved from ash and a satchel that jingled with bones. Not human, she hoped. You walk like one being watched. Alara didn't respond. He stared into the flames, his voice barely louder than the crackle of wood. When she finally looked up, he was gone. Only the warmth of his fire remained, and one boiled egg left on a flat stone. She didn't eat it. It felt like too much kindness for the likes of her dot. By the 7th morning, the road turned eastward, toward the coast. The air changed, salt joining the wind, and gulls crying like orphans overhead. Alara paused atop a low ridge and stared down at the harbor below. Ships bobbed in their moorings, masts like skeletal fingers scratching at the sky. Somewhere among them was passage to the Holy Land, to the next part of her exile, or salvation. Her knees trembled, not from fatigue, but from knowing she was. Truly leaving now, no turning back. The sea would swallow all roads behind her. What remained would be faith, or something close to it. She reached into her cloak, fingers closing around the stone once more. Her mother's voice echoed faintly, a memory wrapped in warmth. Even in exile, the stars remain the same. Alara closed her eyes. Beneath the scent of brine and tar, she could almost hear the church bell from home. Swinging in the wind, she stepped forward, and the wind, ever watchful, carried her name into the waves. The creak of the cart came like a heartbeat, wooden, weary. Alive, it moved with the slow inevitability of sorrow through the cloistered hush of the ancient forest, wheels groaning over roots and stone, burdened not just by cloth and iron, but by the weight of prayers unsaid. Each turn of its axle sounded like a bell tolling in some distant chapel, forgotten by time. Around it, the world whispered in green and gold, light slanting through a canopy so thick it swallowed the sky, dappling the mossy earth with trembling patches of sun and shadow. Thomas walked beside it, not as a guide, but as a mourner. His feet knew the road only as far as grief would carry him. The rest was faith or something colder. He did not count the days. What was a day to a man who had buried his joy? The world had already ended once. Everything now was aftermath. His hand gripped the pilgrim's staff. The wood had long since molded to his fingers. Rough-hewn oak, softened by sweat, time, and sorrow. Its grain ran like rivers through it, veins of old memory. It was not a weapon, though he sometimes wished it were. It could not beat back fever or regret. Beneath his cloak, the carved bird nestled close to his ribs. Ilara's bird. He had whittled it from alder the spring she turned 7, its wings forever caught mid-flight. It had sat on her windowsill, watching the world she was never meant to leave. Now it traveled the world she never would see. He could still feel the warmth of her fingers when he placed it in her palm, the fever already stealing her away. A father's promise is a strange thing. It cannot mend flesh or alter fate. Yet, when she had looked up at him with eyes fever-glazed and soft with trust, he had whispered the vow, "I'll go. For both of us. I'll find the holy place." And now, here he was, among strangers, among pilgrims, a woman with eyes hollowed by loss, a boy too young for such a journey, yet old enough to have no one left. an old monk who muttered Latin in his sleep, his hands stained with ink and wine. They said little. They shared dried bread and boiled roots. They kept close when wolves howled in the dark, and farther when daylight returned. But hardship stitches even the torn together. In hunger, they found kindness. In silence, a kind of trust. They crossed a river swollen with meltwater. The boy nearly drowned. Thomas pulled him out, shivering, coughing, eyes wide with terror, and said nothing of it. That night, the boy sat closer to him, shared his meager fire, offered half a turnip without words. Later, when a group of travelers appeared from the hills, faces hidden, hands too eager, Thomas held his staff tightly and stood firm at the head of the cart. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke clearly. I've already lost everything. You'll find nothing left to take. The men passed, slowly, reluctantly, but they passed, and the road wound on. Sometimes, in the depth of night, Thomas would wake gasping, unsure if the wind carried wolves or her voice. Sometimes it was both. Sometimes it was neither. The bird would press against his chest like a heartbeat. He would place it in his palm, run his thumb along its wings, and whisper into the trees, I'm still walking, little one. And somehow, that would be enough to keep going. They passed ruins, a chapel, broken and consumed by ivy. The boy lit a candle there. The monk recited something that might have been a prayer, or simply memory. No one asked. Some things were better left to silence. As they climbed into higher ground, the forest began to thin, revealing distant hills bathed in twilight. The air grew colder, and frost lingered longer on the ground each morning. The cart creaked louder. Now, the wheels protested, but it still moved. They still moved. One evening, they reached a ridge. The sun was dying in fire behind them, casting the earth in long shadows that stretched like fingers toward night. The group stopped. No one spoke. Below, in the valley, a village lay smothered in mist. Beyond it, faint and flickering, the glimmer of a river, silver and wide, separating them from the coast beyond. The monk murmured, the sea is near. But to Thomas, it wasn't the sea that stole his breath. It was the way the light caught the mist, like the last breath of the sleeping child. He saw her then, just for a moment. Elara, hair tangled, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with mischief. She turned to him, smiled, and was gone. Only fog remained. His knees trembled. Grief is not linear. It circles. It waits in corners. It ambushes. But in that moment, on that ridge, Thomas did not fall. He straightened. He looked to the path. He stepped forward. The others followed. That night, the fire was brighter. The boy laughed, once, startled at his own sound. The woman handed Thomas a crust of bread without being asked. And when the wolves howled, farther now, their song felt more like morning than menace. Sleep came slower. But it came, and in his dreams, Thomas did not see the fever, did not see the grave. He saw a road, stone and sand, winding toward distant. Domes and crosses etched against a sun too bright to look upon. He saw her beside him, not sick, not fading. Just walking. One hand in his, one bird in hers. The road to the Holy Land was long, but it was no longer walked alone. Ahead, the salt winds of the coast, the hunger of the sea, and ships waiting to bear them into the heat and silence of absolution. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer fell silent behind him, and in its place rose a deeper silence, one that did not come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of doubt. Brother Alaric walked alone beneath a sky that could not decide if it were morning or merely indifferent, a gray, low-hanging veil that swallowed both sun and shadow. Each step he took on the rain-slicked cobblestones echoed softly behind him. as if the village itself were reluctant to let him go. The smell of horse dung, wet hay, and smoke clung to his habit like memory. He did not flinch from it. He welcomed it, earthy, harsh, real. It was the scent of the world outside cloisters, the scent of ordinary sin and survival. He carried only two things: a wooden cross, worn smooth by years of whispered prayers, and a psalter, bound in cracked leather, its pages as thin and fragile as breath. The sandals on his feet, once firm on monastery floors, slipped slightly. On the uneven stone, he did not pause to adjust them. Let discomfort do its work. He was not walking toward comfort. He was walking toward fire. The fire of doubt it had begun in the quiet, as most things do, not with rebellion, not with anger, just a question, a whisper. What if he no longer listens? Not a loss of faith, exactly. More like a slow unraveling of the thread that once tied heaven to his heart. A thread made of psalms, routine, obedience. A thread now fraying. The abbot had seen it, said nothing cruel, only placed a hand on Alaric's shoulder and whispered, "Then go. Seek him where he last spoke to man in fire and salt. And if he is silent, perhaps you will find out why." It was blessing and burden stitched into one breath. The children, playing by the roadside, mud-splashed, laughter-sharp, looked at him like he was a storybook character, half-fabled, half-feared. One little girl, no older than 5, reached toward him with a daisy in her hand. He stopped. Kneeling slightly, he took it, clumsy in his large fingers, awed by the gift of such innocence. She smiled and ran off, leaving him with a white flower, already wilting in his hand. It was a gesture that pierced deeper than any sermon. A child's grace, freely given. A grace he did not know how to receive. The road bent away from the village soon after, past fields drowned in mist, past old stone walls cloaked in ivy, past scarecrows that looked more like crucified men in the half-light. His legs ached. His shoulders stiffened beneath the soaking cloth. The rain had begun, soft at first, then insistent. It traced down his cheeks, cold and unwelcome. He told himself they were not tears, but the line between heaven's sorrow. And man's unraveling is sometimes too thin to see. He pressed on. The psalter grew heavier in his pack. His cross, heavier still. Its weight was not in the wood, but in what it had once meant to him. Once he had believed it was a shield. Now it felt more like a mirror, reflecting back a man with cracked faith and silent prayers. He remembered the saints, those who had walked these roads with blistered feet and burning conviction, who had fasted until visions came, who had sung hymns into the storm and heard God's reply in thunder. He was not one of them. He did not sing. His mouth was dry. His thoughts loud. He found no visions. Only memories. One in particular. A winter night in the scriptorium, the fire low, the candle guttering. He had looked up from his manuscript and whispered, "Lord, do you still walk among us?" No answer had come, only silence. The kind of silence that stays. Ahead, the road dipped into a hollow where a single stone cross rose from a bed of nettles. Its arms were cracked, moss veined the base. Someone had left a bone beside it, bleached and brittle. He didn't know if it belonged to man or beast, but it felt holy. In a forgotten, fearful way, he stopped beside it, kneeling once more, this time not for a child, but for the unanswered rain ran from the edge of his hood and pooled on the earth. He placed the wilted daisy at the foot of the cross. It seemed fitting. A flower that had known joy and now decay, offered not to saints or relics, but to the silence itself. He did not pray aloud, but in the stillness, a single thought formed, not shaped into doctrine or chant, but raw and wordless. I am here. That was all. And somehow it was enough to rise Dot by the time the clouds broke. Just slightly, the road ahead had turned to mud. He walked it anyway, each footstep a soft surrender to the unknown. The distant sound of water reached him. Not rain, but waves. The sea Dot, it was near Dot where pilgrims waited, where ships strained at their moorings, where the next passage, not of land, but of soul, would begin. He did not know what he would find in the deserts of the Holy Land. He did not even know what he hoped for. Only that the questions that haunted his cell had followed him like shadows into the world, and he would walk until he outpaced them, or found a voice waiting in the silence. The sky above cleared just enough to let one shaft of light pierce through. It touched the wooden cross in his hand, just briefly, and for a moment, Alaric did not feel alone. Dot beyond the hills. The coast breathed with the tide. Pilgrims gathered at firelight, and among them, a woman walking for penance, a father bearing grief like armor, and now, a monk searching for God in the wilderness of his own doubt. The rain came like penance from the heavens, relentless, rhythmic, uninvited. Dot. It drummed against the warped shutters of the roadside inn with a fury that drowned out thought, but not fear. Inside, the air was thick with breath and smoke, sour ale and sweat, a stew of humanity that clung to the walls and crept beneath skin. Isabella sat motionless, her fingers tracing the frayed stitching at the hem of her tunic, as if memory could be sewn back into place one thread at a time. She was not made for places like this. The table beneath her hands was rough with splinters, the bench unforgiving, the light flickering and half-hearted, all of it foreign, loud, too real, and she too soft for it all. Or so they had said. Dot. Her father's voice haunted her, still measured, final, as cold and sharp as the edge of a blade wrapped in silk. You will go. You will cleanse what shame has clung to this family. You will walk where saints have bled, and return not as a girl, but as a vessel of grace. But grace was hard to find among mud and drunken laughter, and saints did not walk barefoot through rat-infested halls, nor sit trembling in their 6th hour beside a fire they dared not approach. She pulled her veil closer, not for modesty, but for armor, a thin shield against the gazes that slid across her like oil. The men at the far table, loud, slurred, their words thick with heat and hunger, laughed with the sharpness of wolves testing fences. She knew. Their kind, not from experience, but from warning, from stories whispered by older maids, half scared, half jealous. The kind of stories that always ended in silence. Isabella was 16, just 16, and already exiled, not for a crime of her own making, but for a shadow, cast long and low by someone else's whisper, a flirtation scene, a letter read, or perhaps only imagined. Her eyes linger too long. She laughed too freely. She walks with no fear. That was all it took in the world of merchants and men. To be thought impure was to be made impure. And in the eyes of her father, truth was less valuable than the scent of scandal. He gave her a pouch of coins, a map inked with places she could not pronounce, and a promise sealed with cruelty. You will return a woman forgiven, or not at all. She clutched the pouch now under her cloak, not for safety, but for the feel of something familiar. Her mother's ribbon was tied around it, pale lavender, frayed at the edge. A piece of home that still carried the faintest scent of crushed petals and quiet songs. She missed them, her sisters, their small feet pounding through the garden, laughter like birdsong, the way they had clung to her skirts and cried when the door closed behind her. No one cried for long in houses like that. No one was allowed to. A gust of wind howled against the inn. The shutters rattled. A candle flickered. And for a heartbeat, the shadows on the wall danced into monstrous shapes. Cloaks with no bodies, hands with no arms. She flinched, then breathed, then straightened. Fear was constant now, a quiet companion, always watching, always whispering. But beneath it, something else stirred. Not courage. Not yet, but a hardness. A beginning. She had survived the first night. On the road, she had paid the cart driver without flinching, had watched two men fight over bread without screaming, had walked into this inn, soaked, shivering, alone, and found her own corner. They hadn't broken her. Not yet. She lifted. Her eyes then, just slightly. The tavern keeper, bent with years and smoke, glanced her way. His gaze was not cruel. Just tired Dot. He brought her a bowl, half-stale broth, watery but hot. She thanked him with a nod. The men at the far table laughed again. But one of them, the youngest, looked at her and then away, something like shame briefly cutting through. His drink blurred grin. She would remember that. The rain began to slow. The sound softened from war to lullaby. And in that softening, something in her loosened. She was not meant for this journey. That much was true. But the journey did not care who was meant for it. It welcomed all, crushed all, transformed all. She sipped her broth, closed her eyes. In the flickering dark behind her lids, she saw the road ahead, mud-streaked, sun-scorched, crawling with hunger, disease, and despair. She saw bones beneath sand, hands reaching upward in prayer or surrender. It was hard to say she saw a holy land that had devoured saints and soldiers alike, and then she saw herself, standing, still standing, older, thinner, but upright. Alive. Not a gust of smoke from the hearth stung her eyes. Or perhaps it was the thought, the flicker of belief in herself, not heaven, that she might yet walk through all of it, and emerge not cleansed, but claimed. The candle had. Her table hissed. Its flame bowed to the wind, then rose again. She opened her eyes. The men had fallen quieter. The innkeeper was wiping mugs. The rain had stopped. And beyond the door, beyond the mud, and the stars still hidden in mist, the coast waited. And the ships. And with them, the others. A grieving father clutching a child's bird. A monk walking with doubt for company. A woman cloaked in guilt and silence. Soon they would meet, not as friends, not even as allies, but as souls walking in the same direction, toward a land that promised either ruin or rebirth. She rose, paid the keeper with coins her father had given, and stepped into the cold, damp night. The door shut behind her. The shadows inside returned to their mutterings. And Isabella, daughter of whispers, exiled by fear, began to walk. The wind carried the scent of salt now. And on the far edge of the world, the sails were being raised. The sea does not whisper. It groans. It claws. It sings in the voice of old gods, cold, unfeeling, eternal. And somewhere in its wide, undivided breath, a single ship, no larger than a speck, shuddered forward through the swell, carrying souls too fragile to belong in such vastness. Below deck, the darkness was thick as molasses, broken only by the swing of a single lantern, its flame dancing madly, casting pilgrims in fleeting silhouettes like ghosts trying to remember. Their shape, Alara lay curled against the timber hull, cheek pressed to splintered wood, trying to pretend it was earth. It was not. It groaned and shifted beneath her like something alive, tired of bearing so much sorrow in its belly. The air, if it could be called that, was foul with tar, salt, human breath, and the stench of sickness. A man coughed in this corner. Another muttered prayers through cracked lips. Children whimpered in sleep. And above them all, the wind screamed through the rigging like a mother mourning her drowned child. This was not the holy pilgrimage she had imagined in the safe warmth of her father's cottage. There were no hymns sung on this sea. Only silence. And the steady, maddening slap of waves against the wooden coffin that bore them onward. She remembered the harbor, the chaos of departure, gulls shrieking overhead, men shouting, the scent of rope, wine, sweat, and brine. The last glimpse of land, her land, fading into mist as the ship turned eastward. She had wanted to scream, to leap into the waves, to run, but she had not, because dying at sea was better than watching him die at home. Her brother pale, frail, burning, his breath rattling like dry leaves. His eyes glazed, seeing things that weren't there. A sickness that came like a thief in the night and spared no kindness. The sweating plague, the healer had whispered, and nothing they gave him worked, until the old woman, blind in one eye, feared by the villagers, had taken Alara's hand and said, "There is something. In the east, a sliver of the true cross. In Jerusalem, blessed, healing, but cursed to find. Hope, desperate, wild, had rooted in Alara's chest, and now she sailed for it. A girl with shaking hands, an empty purse, and a locket around, her neck containing a lock of his hair. Pale, like wheat before it wilts. She touched the locket now. It was warm against her chest, heavy with meaning. A charm, a burden, a vow. Around her, the others clung to their own relics, bones, crosses, scraps of parchment, bits of cloth, each one carried like armor, though none could keep the sea from rising. Days passed like fog, indistinct, endless. The light above deck was too bright, the darkness below too close. Food came in small, sour servings. Water grew warm in its barrels. And fear was a constant passenger. Sometimes in the distance, a sail would appear, a dark slash on the horizon. The ship would go silent. Hearts would still. Pirates, raiders, men who bled others for coin or sport. But the sails always faded. Or perhaps they were only imagined, fears made flesh by minds. Too tired to dream. Lara spoke little. There were no words she trusted, only the rhythm of her breath and the memory of her brother's smile before the fever took it away. Sometimes she prayed, but not for salvation, only for time. "Let me reach the shore," she whispered into the dark. "Let me find the relic. Let me try." And once, when she awoke from a fever dream where the sea swallowed the sun, she thought she heard a voice in the timbers. "Try, or die, but move." The voice might have been her own. On the 12th night, the storm came. Not thunder, not lightning, but a wind that howled from the south, snapping sails, tossing men like leaves, and throwing their small cogs sideways across. The foam. Alara clung to the mast, barely able to stand, her veil ripped from her head, her knuckles white on soaked rope. She thought of her brother, his breathing, the warmth of his hand. She screamed his name into the wind, not in fear, but in fury. She would not let the sea take her before she could try, not while he still waited, not while he still breathed. The storm passed by morning. The sea quieted. The sails sagged in the damp air, and the pilgrims sat wide-eyed, wet to the bone, alive. One of the old men kissed the deck. Another sang softly in a forgotten tongue. Alara just stared eastward. And in that moment, beneath a gray dawn sky, the first gull appeared, circling once, twice, then vanishing toward the horizon. Land was near. They had not perished. Not yet. Sea had tried, but she had held. Her hands still trembled. Her eyes still burned. Her belly still ached with hunger. But inside her, something had settled. Not peace. Resolve. She had stared into the mouth of the sea and found herself staring back. And now Jerusalem awaited, the land of prophets, of relics, of war and miracles. Place that could kill her or bless her, but it would see her. Soon. The stench of rot and roses mingled in the air. earned refuse curling into the sky like the last breath of a beggar, and incense, heavy and golden, clinging to the folds of Father Michael's robe, as if trying to sanctify what could not be cleansed. Jerusalem, the city of blood and relics, of prophets, soldiers, saints, and bones. And now, him. One man in a river, of thousands, pushed and pulled through ancient streets that twisted like questions without answers. He moved slowly, as if the weight of the holy had thickened the very air. Or perhaps it was simply exhaustion, the kind that no longer announces itself with pain, but sits quiet behind the eyes. A child brushed past him, barefoot, laughing. A man shouted in Greek at a merchant stall, hands red from pomegranate juice or blood, he could not tell. The clamor rose like a tide. Arabic, Aramaic, Latin, Hebrew, 1,000 tongues layered like dust on stone. The sun beat down with no mercy. Its heat seemed to rise not from the sky, but from the ground itself, as if the city remembered every fire, every siege, every drop of spilled blood, and returned it in waves through the stone. Father Michael wiped his brow, but the sweat returned instantly. Salt burned in his eyes, but it was not what made them water. This place, this hallowed, blood-soaked ground. He had dreamed of it in candlelight, whispered its name in sermons, wept for it during nights of doubt that was supposed to heal him, to answer, to purify, but the streets were too loud, too human. He had envisioned Jerusalem as a crown of silence, a place where God still walked barefoot through dust. Instead, it pulsed with noise, and God felt lost in the crowd. He passed beggars missing limbs, priests bartering for relics, children hawking crosses made in China. And he wondered, had faith always looked this much like trade? His fingers tightened around his rosary, worn smooth from decades of prayer. A gift from his mother, or his mentor. He could not remember anymore. The beads were warm from his hand, but cold inside his soul. He had clung to them through sickness. War, the bandits in the Valley of Ashes, the mother who buried her daughter with a song. And now? They were just wood on a string. He found himself at the edge of a marketplace, spices flaring in bright pyramids, dried figs, oil lamps, silk dyed in shades he had only seen in dreams. A man selling water winked at him as if holiness were just another buyer. He turned away and walked toward the one place he believed might still hold silence. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb, the stone, the place where death ended and began again. But even here, no sanctuary. Pilgrims pressed shoulder to shoulder, shoving, weeping, crawling on their knees. Their voices were soft, desperate, but together they became a roar, like waves crashing on a reef, again and again, as if the sound might wear a hole through heaven itself. He stepped inside. Cool shadows wrapped around him like a shroud. Candles flickered in the alcoves. The scent of old stone and centuries of breath filled his lungs. He wanted to cry, but nothing came. He knelt near the tomb, closed his eyes, and in that stillness, a simple, terrifying thought bloomed. What if there is nothing to find here? He remembered the old woman on the road. Her son had died days earlier. She buried him herself in a shallow grave, then washed her hands with wine because the water was gone. She had looked at him, not with hatred, but with pity. You think God waits for you in a city, she had said. Mine didn't wait at all. The tomb offered no answer, no warmth, no voice, only stone and the weight of every soul that had touched it. He stayed there for a long time, until the candles burned low, until his knees ached. Then he rose and walked out into the golden twilight. The city glowed now, not with peace, but with fire. The setting sun caught on the domes, the rooftops, the blades of soldiers, and turned everything to blood and gold. A child cried. A distant bell rang. A muezzin called out from the east, and it hit him. The sacred was not in the stones, not in the relics, not in the rituals. It was in the ache, not in the struggle to believe when the silence felt endless. It was in every step he took, not knowing if it mattered. That was the terrifying truth. The Holy Land was not a reward. It was a mirror, and in it he saw himself aged, afraid, but still walking, still hoping, even if hope now looked less like a sunrise and more like a candle in a storm. He paused at a narrow alley where 3 children huddled together over a loaf of bread, sharing it with a dog. He smiled for the first time in weeks. Perhaps that was enough. Not the great revelation, not the divine voice, but this, a flicker, a kindness, a moment that didn't ask for more than presence. Father Michael turned toward the Pilgrim hostel. Others would arrive soon, from the ship, from the road, a girl with a locket and salt in her hair, a monk chasing certainty, a father with a hollow bird in his pocket. They would bring their ghosts, and perhaps he would help carry them, not as a priest, but as another soul, learning how to walk without answers. The dust moved like breath across the earth, fine, pale, and ceaseless. It curled around Inez's ankles like the ghost of something buried, whispering across cracked stone and scorched soil with a voice older than kingdoms. She kept walking. Her boots, once soft leather stitched by servants, were now split at the seams, darkened with blood and salt. Each step pressed her deeper into the bones of the land, a land that gave no mercy and asked no questions. Above, the sky stretched endless, colorless, pitiless, a silent judge watching from on high as another pilgrim dared the dust. Was no road, only instinct, a feeling, a direction, the pull of something unspoken. The sun had long since ceased to warm her. Now it punished. It burned with indifference, not cruel, but ancient, as if it had seen too much to care. Her shadow, once strong and defiant, now wavered beside her like a dying flame. She remembered once a hall of stone and velvet, the hiss of silk slippers on polished floors, a ring placed on her finger without her consent, the slow suffocation of privilege, its comforts barbed and golden. She had been a daughter, a possession, a bargaining chip whispered about behind. Closed doors, but not now. Now she was stripped to her truest form. No name, no title, no past, only purpose. The Holy Land, they said, was holy because it burned. It burned the way everything false, everything soft, everything unworthy. She had not come to pray. She had come to be unmade, so she could build something of herself from the ashes. At her breast, tucked in a hidden seam, a piece of embroidered linen, small and fragile as breath, its threads, once white, now dulled by sand and sweat, but still intact, stitched by the hands of a boy she had loved in the quiet hours between dusk and duty. A boy whose name was no longer safe to speak, but whose memory burned brighter than the sun. He had kissed her once beneath the cloisters, the stone cold against her back. He had whispered, "You are not made for a cage." She had never forgotten. The desert was her refusal. Her rebellion, but it was also her rebirth. The silence pressed in from all sides, deeper than church stillness, more sacred than any sermon. It was the sound of becoming. A low wind stirred, gritty and sharp, lifting her hair like a veil. In the distance, the bones of a camel lay sprawled, a grotesque sculpture left to bleach beneath heaven's glare. Its rib cage gaped like an open mouth, as if it too had once cried out for release. She paused only briefly, not in fear, but in understanding. Death was here. It walked beside her, but so did something else. She could feel it in the ache of her limbs, in the blistered soles of her feet, in the way her heartbeat now matched the rhythm of the earth, that resilience it didn't come with banners or song. It came with breath, with blood, with a woman who refused to disappear. The sun began to sink. Slow and deliberate, a gold coin melting into fire. It painted the horizon in streaks of violence, crimson, orange, molten copper, as if the heavens themselves were ablaze. And there, silhouetted in the distance, a lone olive tree. Twisted, weathered, eternal. She moved toward it, drawn not by shade, but by meaning, for even in desolation, life clung on. Defiant. As she reached its roots, she knelt, pressing her palm into the dry soil, not in prayer, but in promise. Her journey had not led to salvation, nor forgiveness, nor peace. It had led to something harder, something purer, the realization that no one would hand her a future. She would have to carve it with grit, with pain, with the scarred hands of a woman who had walked through dust and flame and not been turned to ash. Behind her, the land whispered of those who had come before: Elara, Thomas, Alaric, Isabella, Father Michael. Each had walked their own road. Each had sought something lost or sacred. And in the end, each had found themselves. In fragments and in fire. The wind shifted. The stars began to prick the sky. And Agnes stood, not noblewoman, not runaway, but something new. Something forged. She turned east, toward the darkening hills, toward the flickering lights of distant campfires, where other pilgrims gathered in silence, unaware that soon their paths would cross. And as the night claimed the desert, she walked forward into it, not afraid, not alone, but burning with a truth no sun could bleach away, that the road to the Holy Land was never just about the place. It was about becoming worthy of the journey itself.